The biggest changes in a nation rarely arrive with flashing lights or dramatic announcements. More often, they begin with a quiet decision buried inside an official email or a government memo that barely makes the evening news. By the time most people realize what happened, the consequences are already unfolding. That's exactly why one decision made in early July deserves far more attention than it's receiving. When a president removes every remaining member of an independent election, commissioned just months before a nationwide election, it isn't simply another staffing change. Whether you agree with the administration or not, it's the kind of move that raises serious questions about the future of the institutions responsible for protecting public confidence in the electoral process. On July 9, 2026, the White House dismissed the final 3 commissioners serving on the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, the only federal agency created specifically to help states conduct secure and reliable elections. Reports indicate that 2 commissioners learned of their dismissal through a brief email informing them their service had ended immediately. Another commissioner was allowed to step down voluntarily. Within hours, the commission no longer had enough members to conduct official business. No leadership, no voting quorum, and no ability to carry out many of its core responsibilities. Whether someone views this as justified reform or unnecessary disruption, the timing alone has sparked an intense national debate. Before jumping to conclusions, it's important to understand why this agency exists in the first place. This isn't about choosing Democrats over Republicans or vice versa. It's about understanding the role institutions play in maintaining public trust. Election systems only function when citizens believe the rules are applied fairly, regardless of which party wins. Once confidence in those systems begins to weaken, repairing that trust becomes far more difficult than protecting it in the first place. That's why the circumstances surrounding these dismissals have become a much larger conversation than the personnel changes themselves. To understand why this matters, we have to go back more than 2 decades. After the disputed 2000 U.S. presidential election, problems with ballot design, voting procedures, and election administration exposed serious weaknesses in the system. The controversy wasn't simply about one candidate winning or losing. It revealed flaws that lawmakers from both parties agreed needed to be addressed. In response, Congress passed the Help America Vote Act of 2002 with overwhelming bipartisan support. The law created the Election Assistance Commission, an independent body designed to support, not control, state election officials by developing standards, certifying voting equipment, distributing security funding, and sharing best practices across thousands of local jurisdictions. It wasn't built to dominate elections from Washington. It was designed to strengthen them quietly in the background. One reason many Americans have never heard of the Election Assistance Commission is because it was never meant to be political. It operated behind the scenes, helping local officials modernize voting systems, improve election security, and coordinate federal resources without becoming part of the daily political headlines. Institutions like this often receive little attention when they're functioning well. Their value becomes obvious only when they're weakened or suddenly disappear. And that's why the recent leadership shakeup has become such a significant story. Not because the agency was famous, but because its work affected nearly every election held across the country. Now think about what this really means. Without commissioners in place, the Election Assistance Commission can't approve new voting equipment. More than 36 states rely on federal certification before they purchase or deploy voting machines. If a county discovers that its aging equipment needs to be replaced before Election Day, it may find itself trapped in bureaucratic limbo. No certification means no new machines. The Commission also loses the ability to finalize updated voting standards, distribute federal election security grants, update the National Voter Registration Form, or provide guidance to the thousands of local election officials who depend on that support every election cycle. Those aren't politicians working in Washington. They're the people running elections in counties and towns across America. Before leaving office, Commissioner Benjamin Hovland warned that when governments demand more from election officials while giving them fewer resources, mistakes become almost inevitable. That's a warning worth taking seriously. And when you combine the paralysis of the EAC with the earlier dismantling of key election security programs inside CISA, the picture becomes even more concerning. It's like removing the firefighters from a town just before wildfire season begins, then acting surprised when the flames spread. When systems fail under those conditions, it isn't Washington that pays first. It's ordinary voters standing in line on Election Day. The political backdrop only adds another layer to the story. the administration has been facing difficult approval ratings, economic pressure, and growing criticism over foreign policy. Historically, the party occupying the White House tends to lose congressional seats during midterm elections. That reality creates enormous political pressure. Reports have suggested that some within the administration have spent months preparing arguments that unfavorable election outcomes could be blamed on flaws in the election system itself rather than dissatisfaction among voters. Whether or not that strategy succeeds, the timing of dismantling the nation's primary bipartisan election support agency naturally raises difficult questions. If the institutions designed to reduce confusion are weakened, and confusion later emerges, it becomes much easier for political leaders to point toward the resulting disorder as evidence that the system cannot be trusted. The official explanation for the dismissals was the need to ensure leadership fully aligned with protecting election integrity. But critics argue that such language risks redefining bipartisan independence as political disloyalty. Institutions, created to serve as neutral guardrails, begin to appear as obstacles instead of safeguards. Replacing commissioners is not an overnight process either. New nominees require Senate confirmation, meaning the commission could remain unable to function during one of the most important election periods in years. Looking ahead, several possibilities emerge, and none of them are especially simple. One possibility is that the Election Assistance Commission remains leaderless through the midterm elections, forcing states to operate with reduced federal guidance, delayed certifications, and limited coordination on election security. Smaller counties with fewer technical resources would likely face the greatest challenges because they rely most heavily on federal expertise. Another possibility is that dismissed commissioners challenge their removal in court, potentially creating a landmark legal battle over the limits of presidential authority following the Supreme Court's recent ruling. Legal scholars have already questioned whether bipartisan commissions established by Congress deserve different constitutional protections than other executive agencies. A third scenario involves the president nominating replacements, but the confirmation process could take months, creating political disputes over appointments while the election calendar continues moving forward. The scenario that concerns many observers most is the cumulative effect of weakened federal election institutions. Administrative problems, delayed certifications, or technical failures could fuel public distrust regardless of whether those problems are widespread or isolated. Yet there is also a more hopeful path. State election officials, local governments, bipartisan organizations, and civic volunteers have repeatedly demonstrated that they can step forward when institutions face pressure. American elections have overcome enormous challenges before, and many believe they can do so again if citizens remain engaged. Perhaps the most important lesson in all of this has very little to do with political parties. Leadership is not measured only by the power someone exercises. Often it's measured by the restraint they choose to show. A healthy democracy depends not simply on winning elections, but on preserving the process so future generations inherit institutions they can still trust. Free, fair, and secure elections are not victories for one side or the other. They're the foundation that allows every political disagreement to be settled peacefully. The Election Assistance Commission was created to strengthen that foundation. Like every institution, it had imperfections, but imperfection has always called for improvement, not destruction. Before departing, Commissioner Hovland encouraged Americans to volunteer as poll workers and participate directly in the democratic process. That message rises above party politics. It reminds us that democracy ultimately belongs to citizens, not elected officials. The future of public trust will depend less on any single president or administration and more on whether ordinary Americans continue believing that these institutions are worth protecting. History has shown that democracies survive not because they are flawless, but because enough people choose, generation after generation, to defend the rules that keep them functioning.